Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u još jedno izdanje emisije Granice Istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Humanitarna intervencija je termin koji se često koristi u međunarodnim odnosima. To predstavlja svojevrstan odgovor jedne ili više država na teška kršenja ljudskih prava u drugoj državi. Ta vrsta intervencije se može manifestovati prijetnjom ili upotrebom vojne sile kako bi se zaustavila ili spriječila teška kršenja ljudskih prava bez dozvole države na čijoj se teritoriji događaju. Proteklih godina vode se žustre diskusije o opravdanosti, moralnosti, legalnosti i selektivnosti humanitarnih intervencija. Postavlja se i pitanje da li se pod krinkom humanitarne intervencije obaraju nepoželjni režimi. U ovom izdanju emisije analiziramo primjere humanitarnih intervencija u svijetu. Razgovaramo i sa vodećim stručnjacima iz te oblasti. Ali prije toga pogledajmo uvodni prilog.
Sukob u Libiji se rasplamsava. Snage halife Haftara napreduju prema zapadu. Trenutno se nalaze u Bregi i namjeravaju otvoriti novi front u Sirtu. U predgrađima Tripolija već mjesecima traju borbe Haftarovih i snaga međunarodno priznate vlade nacionalnog jedinstva. Jučer je vlada u Tripoliju objavila da prihvata veću pomoć Turske.
Haftar i njegove nelegalne snage primaju pomoć. Čiju? To svi znaju. S druge strane, Saradž i njegova legitimna vlada ne primaju nikakvu pomoć. Mi smo na Saradžovoj strani i pružit ćemo im svaku moguću pomoć.
Riječ je o sukobu koji se vodi na Bliskom istoku, u Sjevernoj Africi pa i šire. Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati, Saudijska Arabija, Egipat i Rusija pružaju manju ili veću pomoć Haftaru. Bojazan da bi Haftar mogao srušiti vladu u Tripoliju podstakla je Tursku da nešto učini.
Turska nije zainteresirana za samu Libiju. Ako pogledate kartu Mediterana, vidjet ćete da od Egipta preko juga Turske, sjevernog Kipra, Grčke te potencijalno Libije, koja ako padne pod kontrolu Haftara ulazi u orbitu kontrole Emirata, to je neka vrsta pomorskog obruča oko Turske. Libija je Turskoj posljednja prilika da to spriječi.
Iako je vlada nacionalnog jedinstva ratifikovala sporazum o sigurnosnoj i vojnoj saradnji s Turskom, potpisan prošlog mjeseca, još nije u potpunosti jasno o kakvoj je tačno pomoći riječ. Turska bi time osnažila svoju ulogu u Libiji. Kao i u Siriji, Rusija i Turska podržavaju različite strane u sukobu, pružajući im diplomatsku i drugu potporu.
Održavamo stalni kontakt sa Saradžovom vladom, kao i s maršalom Haftarom. Neprekidno komuniciramo sa svojim partnerima u Turskoj, Evropi i drugim državama. Naš stav je da je najbolje rješenje da strane u sukobu nađu kompromis.
Pitali smo glasnogovornika generalnog sekretara UN-a za stav o turskoj odluci da pruži vojnu pomoć Tripoliju.
Generalni sekretar u više je navrata jučer jasno izrazio svoj stav i mogu reći frustraciju situacijom u Libiji, činjenicom da različite države stalno krše embargo na uvoz oružja, stalnim borbama u Tripoliju i oko njega, ali i u drugim gradovima Libije.
No kraj sukobima se još ne nazire. Leila Nezirović, Al Jazeera.
Detaljnije o ovoj temi pojašnjava nam David Rieff, novinar i autor brojnih knjiga o međunarodnim konfliktima i humanitarnim intervencijama. David, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, when we talk about humanitarian interventions in the world, clearly there are success stories, but also quite a number of unsuccessful examples. If you draw on the examples of Bosnia and Kosovo, would you argue that humanitarian interventions actually work?
Well, they certainly don't work very well. In Kosovo, in Bosnia, they came too late. I mean, the term itself is kind of a problem because it's a term, humanitarian intervention, that avoids politics. I mean, my view about looking back on the war in Bosnia, my view is the same as it was at the time, which is that there was a side that was largely in the right, that is to say the Bosnian government side, and two other sides, the Serbian and Croatian sides, that were largely, if not completely, in the wrong. So I always thought what was necessary was a political intervention. I thought the Europeans, and to the extent that the United States is a European power, that the United States should have intervened to support the Bosnian government, the legitimate government of Bosnia. I didn't think that they should intervene because people were suffering, which is what a humanitarian intervention does, which is, if you like, a kind of a depoliticized intervention. Humanitarian intervention says people are suffering and therefore powerful states should intervene. You could argue that's a good thing or a bad thing, but then you start saying, well, were people suffering more in Bosnia than they were in Somalia or in Angola or in Guatemala or I don't know where? Well, the answer to that is no. Things were terrible here in Sarajevo, but they were also terrible in many other countries and places. So I never thought the justification, I always think humanitarian intervention is kind of a cop-out, frankly. It's a way of not talking about politics. Having said that, to come back to what you ask, it didn't work very well. I mean, it hasn't worked very well anywhere. In Bosnia, it came too late. In Kosovo, it was done very badly. I supported it, but it has to be said that, you know, Kosovo was a zero-sum game, and when the Yugoslav army, the VJ, was chased out, you know, there was another kind of ethnic cleansing of Serbs. So, you know, and then Libya's been a disaster. Nobody knew what to do in Syria. So no, it's not a good record.
But why have you seen no calls for the R2P, the responsibility to protect doctrine, to be implemented in the case of the Rohingya in Myanmar, who are, according to quite a number of international organizations for human rights, facing an act of genocide?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think there is, but how would you do it? I mean, look, the real problem with R2P is very simple. It depends on the Security Council of the United Nations. And the Security Council of the United Nations, any of the permanent states, the US, Britain, France, China, Russia, can block it. And there's no question of, if you are the client state of a powerful state, there's going to be no R2P because you need, again, you need Security Council authorization. This may sound to your viewers like a technicality, but it's anything but. It's actually the way the world really works, and China supports the government of Myanmar, full stop. Just as Russia supports the government of Syria, and frankly, the US supports Israel. And in those conditions, there will never be an intervention. Interventions are for places where the criminals have no good friends, no powerful friends. That's the reality of the world. Libya was an exception. I mean, after all, the only place where an R2P intervention, military intervention, has taken place was since R2P was agreed to in the first decade of the century. You know, the only place it's been done was to overthrow the Gaddafi regime in Libya. And that was done because, for some reason, the Russians and the Chinese agreed to it happening. But the reality of the world today, as any observer of the UN, or indeed of the Chinese and Russian governments will tell you, is that they thought they got suckered by the Western powers in Libya. And they're not going to fall for it again. That's the way they view it. I'm not saying necessarily that that's what happened, but that's the way they see it. So you're not going to have R2P in Myanmar / Bangladesh. And you're not, frankly, going to have it in situations where powerful states are the criminals. I mean, one of the most terrible things going on in the world today, I don't know if it's genocide, I don't think it is.
The case of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
Yeah, exactly, are the Uyghurs.
There was my next question. Is R2P only applied in weaker states?
Well, R2P has only been applied once in Libya, and Libya was a weak state.
But other forms of humanitarian interventions? I mean, nobody even mentions or even talks about the possibility of military intervention to save the Uyghurs in China.
Well, you couldn't do it, could you? I mean, it would be, you know, in a way I sympathize with your question. In another way, as you know as well as I do, is anyone going to declare war on China to save the Uyghurs? Would anyone who doing it win? Could anyone defeat the Chinese? I mean, the Americans are the only power on the same level as the Chinese. Every other power, the Chinese would flick them off as if they were a mosquito on your arm. The British are going to challenge the Chinese in Xinjiang? Come on, that's not serious. And you're not going to start World War III to save the Uyghurs. That's a sad fact, but it is a fact. There's no military solution. Now, you could imagine that all of the powerful states in the world said to the Chinese, what you're doing to the Uyghurs is so terrible, we're not going to trade with you anymore. It might even work if all the powerful countries in the world were willing to do that. But you know as well as I do, and your audience knows as well as either of us do, that that's not going to happen.
But we have seen after the toppling of Muammar al-Gaddafi and his regime in Libya that in certain cases humanitarian interventions can be used for regime change. How founded are such fears?
Oh, I think they're very well founded. Because crises like the crisis in Libya was a political crisis. It wasn't just a humanitarian crisis.
It was a very swift intervention, right, compared to Syria today?
Well, people thought they could do it, for one thing. I mean, Libya was very weak. I mean, when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons, that was the end of the joke.
And France was very, very eager to intervene.
Yeah, the war was made in Paris. It was a war, an intervention that actually Obama, who was then president of the United States, as you know, did not want to do.
And why did France have a vested interest in intervening in Libya?
Well, some people would tell you because the government of France at the time, the Sarkozy government, had been too in bed with Libya before and now wanted to cover its tracks. I personally don't believe that, but then I rarely, if ever, believe in conspiracies. But I usually think the reason things happen is because everybody is too stupid to do the right thing. I'm not joking. That's not meant as an ironic remark. I think human stupidity is one of the great motors of human history. But I don't exactly know why the French did it. You'd think because it immediately provoked this massive refugee influx, since Gaddafi had been paid to keep the refugees bottled up in Libya. You'd think that the Europeans would not have wanted his regime to collapse or to be overthrown, but they did.
But in the case of Syria, Western states did intervene in the end, but to bomb ISIL targets, despite President Obama setting up quite a number of red lines towards the use of chemical weapons. There was no military intervention, was there?
No, and you could only have had a military intervention before the Russians intervened in a serious way in 2000. Was it 14 or 15? You're right, yeah. Before that, you probably could have had an intervention, military intervention. Whether you should have had one is another thing. Look, the problem with regime change is what comes after. I mean, Saddam Hussein was a very bad guy, but you know, was regime change, was overthrowing him, did it lead to something better? My own view, it was my view at the time, I opposed the American invasion of Iraq. Unlike many people who supported, a lot of people said to me at the time, but you supported an intervention in Bosnia. Why don't you support an intervention in Iraq? Saddam is worse than Milosevic, which is probably true. But I think we didn't know what to do. Bosnia had a legitimate government that could have ruled the country perfectly well if it hadn't been murdered by the leadership in Belgrade and to a lesser extent the leadership in Zagreb. But I mean, there was nobody really to replace Saddam, and nobody knew what to do, and so the place got even worse than it was under him. I don't know if we would have known what to do in Syria. Unlike other places, it was possible militarily, again, before the Russians came. Once the Russians came, the joke was over. I mean, the Russians, first of all, the Russians controlled the airspace. And again, you know, it's very important when you think about these interventions, call them political or moral or humanitarian, it doesn't matter. for the sake of this conversation, or the sake of this subject. You know, one thing an intervention requires is some reasonable chance of success. Once the Russians were there was no reasonable chance of success for the good and sufficient reason that they controlled the airspace.
Right. David, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Šta je zapravo humanitarna intervencija? Termin se najčešće primjenjuje bez jedne neophodne odrednice, kako bi se prikrio njen stvarni karakter. Riječ je zapravo o vojnoj humanitarnoj intervenciji kako bi se spriječila ili zaustavila ozbiljna kršenja ljudskih prava u drugoj državi. Koncept vojne humanitarne intervencije implicira povezanost tri različita pojma: suverenitet, intervencija i prevencija. Iako možda zvuče kao savremeni fenomen, koncept humanitarne intervencije vuče korijene iz 19. stoljeća. Primjera radi, pod okriljem humanitarizma, Rusija, Britanija i Francuska su podržale grčki ustanak protiv Osmanlija između 1821. i 1830. godine. Također, Britanija i Francuska su vojno intervenisale na Siciliji 1856. godine. Humanitarne vojne intervencije ne provode samo zapadne države. Pod izgovorom humanitarizma, Indija je vojno intervenisala u Bangladešu 1971. godine, Vijetnam u Kambodži 1978. godine, a Tanzanija u Ugandi 1979. godine. U moderno doba bilo je više uspješnih, ali i neuspješnih humanitarnih vojnih intervencija. U Iraku 1991. godine, u Somaliji 1992. godine, u Haitiju 1994. godine, u Ruandi 1994. godine, u Bosni i Hercegovini 1995. godine, u Libiji 2011. godine. Koncept odgovornost da se zaštiti prihvaćen je na svjetskom samitu UN-a 2005. godine. Odatle proizlazi i odgovornost drugih država da zaštite građane one države koja to ne želi, nije u mogućnosti ili je sama počinitelj zločina. Pristalice i protivnici oružane humanitarne intervencije spore se u vezi sa tri osnovna postulata: legalnost, moralnost i isplativost intervencije. Dodatna sporna tačka jeste to što se ponekad pod izgovorom humanitarne intervencije obaraju nepoželjni režimi. Tako su, primjera radi, Sjedinjene Američke Države svoje vojne intervencije i svrgavanje Talibana u Afganistanu i Sadama Huseina u Iraku također pravdale humanitarnim argumentima. U slučaju Iraka, nepronalazak oružja za masovno uništavanje doprinijelo je znatnoj diskreditaciji ideje vojnog humanizma. Jedna od posljedica humanitarnih argumenata za vojne intervencije jeste mogućnost zloupotrebe od velikih sila poput Rusije, Kine i Indije. To se vidjelo 2008. godine kada je Rusija ušla u rat sa Gruzijom i pozvala se na humanitarni vojni intervencionizam kako bi opravdala upotrebu sile u području svog geopolitičkog interesa. Remy Ourdan, reporter francuskog lista Le Monde, izvještavao je sa brojnih žarišta širom svijeta, od Bosne do Afganistana. S njim razgovaram o selektivnosti humanitarnih vojnih intervencija. Remy, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now to start with, over the past 2 decades, the international community has responded more strongly to some humanitarian crises than others. This variation raises serious concerns and questions as to what factors motivate military humanitarian interventions. In the case of Bosnia, the US belatedly intervened in August 1995. In the case of Somalia, they responded quite quickly. Why the inconsistency?
Well, first, because the international community is a concept that doesn't exist politically. There is no international community. There is nothing such as, it's states are making decisions. And the UN Secretary General is only the chief administrator of 5 countries at the Security Council, and maybe a few more now a bit influential. But so, in the case of Somalia, well, the US decided to go, and they went, and it didn't end well for them, and that's one of the reasons Bill Clinton didn't want to intervene in the Balkans for years. Bosnia, we all know that the European countries at the time, with Mitterrand, in France, with the Brits, didn't want to intervene. Their strategy was called containment, which didn't mean...
It didn't quite work.
Yeah, but there was no danger ever that it would go beyond the borders of the former Yugoslavia. So it's containment for what? I mean, it was a strategy, but there was no point of having that strategy. Anyway, that means people can kill each other as long as it's inside these borders. And then it changed when French President Chirac and Clinton decided to intervene. But it's all about politics, and it's all about head of states. The UN doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, the uneven reaction to the conflicts in Libya and Syria is among the most contentious examples in international politics. Despite the numerous red lines set by the White House, there was no humanitarian military intervention in the case of Syria. However, in the case of Libya, there was a very swift multilateral reaction led by France. Did France have a vested interest to respond to the crisis in Libya?
First, let's say the intervention in Libya, it was much easier.
Why?
Although the situation is now than in Syria. Well, because of the military forces on the ground. Gaddafi regime and Gaddafi army was very weak.
But at one time, the Assad regime was almost close to collapse.
Yeah, but so let's say Sarkozy decided the intervention in Libya, but because he had support of the Brits and the Americans. He wouldn't do it alone. In the case of Syria, it's different. Obama decided not to do it after the chemical attacks and the famous, red line. Obama decided not to do it for many reasons. So after that, some other countries decided to intervene in Syria, and that's Iran and Russia. And
Turkey, in a way.
Well, Turkey in the north, yeah, against the Kurds. But the big intervention, military intervention in Syria is from Russia. And if you see it from the point of view of Mr. Putin, it's successful because they are about to win the war, although after we can comment on, the fact that the Syrians cannot go back home, that the Bashar al-Assad regime is probably very weak, and so on. But from a military point of view, they won the war. So there was an intervention in Syria, but it was not from the Western world.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you say that the UN or the so-called international community only intervenes in weak states? I mean, there was no mention, no talk about a possible humanitarian intervention in the case of Myanmar to save the Rohingya, in the case of China to save the Uyghurs. Would anybody go to war with China to save the Uyghurs?
Of course not. But it's not only in weak states, it's by who are they protected? Because Burma, I don't know if it's weak or strong, but it's protected by China. Syria was protected by Russia, and so on and so on.
So it depends on your allies?
A lot. Of course, it depends on many political, aspects. It depends on your public opinions. It depends on your allies. It depends on the mood of the head of states at that time, and so on. But it also depends very much on how is it on the ground, and it's not the same to be welcome. An intervention, usually people call you for help, and you go to help them, and you are welcome, at least on one side. It's not the same as we cannot compare with, for example, some of the post-9/11 wars. Of course, we cannot compare with the invasion of Iraq. That's a proper attack from one country against another one. Nobody called Bush to invade Iraq. He decided by himself. So first, let's not mix all the kind of interventions. It's very different in every case. In the case of Syria, there were people calling for help. The Western, countries would decide not to go. And the regime was calling for help, its allies, Tehran and Moscow, and they decided to go. And it's, everyone's political decision to make.
But how often can, under the auspices of a humanitarian intervention, unfriendly regimes be toppled?
Let's be careful with the word of humanitarian intervention. It's always political. It's always. It doesn't mean good or bad, but it's always probably Somalia in the 90s was really humanitarian intervention, like no politics, no interests whatsoever. But at the end it turned bad with these American casualties in Mogadishu. But I'm always careful with this word humanitarian because it's not always fully humanitarian.
It's a euphemism.
When the West decided to intervene in the former Yugoslavia twice, 95 in Sarajevo and 99 in Kosovo, I think part of it was humanitarian, to stop human casualties. But it's also political and diplomatical. It's for stability in Europe. It's to show to the others, whoever that might be, not to do the same. It's never, fully humanitarian. It's also, it's politics.
Right. And finally, there's always the question of legality and legitimacy. Who exactly decides whether a certain intervention is legal and legitimate?
Again, this fiction that the UN Security Council should decide is a fiction. Almost the whole world approved the intervention in Kosovo and the end of Milosevic, and that didn't go through the UN Security Council because there would have been a Russian and Chinese veto. Yeah. The whole world today believes that the intervention in Syria, in Libya, maybe was wrong because it's a mess and anarchy in Libya, but it went through the UN Security Council. Everybody agreed, and it's even the first time that they use this new R2P concept, responsibility to protect. So it was all legal, it was all fantastic in terms of international law, and now most people are critical with that intervention. So, legality is a strange concept.
Right, Mr. Remy, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Vojni humanitarne intervencije su selektivne naravi. Kako međunarodno pravo ne pojašnjava uvjete legitimiteta i legaliteta, humanitarne vojne intervencije, naročito jednostrane intervencije bez saglasnosti Vijeća sigurnosti, i dalje ostaju predmet mnogih rasprava. Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju Granica Istoka. Ako ste propustili bilo koji dio, emisiju možete pogledati na našem portalu balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.